I thought that like the headline of my campaign would be that I was 19, like running for public office. But in every headline, as people talked about it, it was actually more about my race.
Oh my goodness. I cannot believe you're finally in this moment filming, because we've talked about this for so long. I have so many things I want to ask you. But before we start, I feel like I need to tell something very important.
Okay.
So we met a year and a half ago, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit less than that. And I specifically remember one of like our like mutual VC contacts told us about this happy hour you're hosting. I was like, wait, obviously I want to go. That's insanely cool. And I'm pretty sure within the first minute of me meeting you, you basically changed my life. And I don't think you know this. And I feel like this is the perfect time to tell you, because at this point, like, I did not have TikTok. Like, that wasn't even an app downloaded on my phone.
Yeah.
I was not on social media. I just like did not consume any content. I was very away from that space. And I was very in the weeds of like figuring out like what I wanted to do. I just quit my job. And you just basically in 3 seconds changed my life, because you told me how you use TikTok to really spread your movement and impact so many amazing women, and also created a life for not just yourself financially, but also for all your employees that work with you, and given them an opportunity to do something that really fucking matters for the world. And I cannot even tell you how inspired I was in that moment, realizing that if I similarly had a movement and a mission that I really cared about, there was like literal only one path forward, and it was through social media. So that night, I downloaded TikTok.
Oh my gosh.
And that morning, I posted my first TikTok, and you followed and you commented, and I felt so motivated. And now we're a community of hundreds of thousands of women.
Amazing.
And that's because of you. So I need you to know that.
I started the social media addiction.
No, but seriously, it's actually crazy how negative people are about social media.
Yeah.
And truly is so crazy how many people can really impact. And it's there's like infinite, like, can go and reach people. It's honestly phenomenal. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh my
gosh. It really meant a lot to me.
I'm honored, and I'm glad I'm here. I know it's been kind of like, it's so crazy scheduling in-person things now, because I feel like after the pandemic, we're also used to just like being like, oh, Zoom this, Zoom that. So I'm glad we're doing this in person too, so that we can like, you know, have some face-to-face time.
And I've been wanting to tell you this for so long, and I was like, I have to join the podcast and need other people to know how inspiring you are. So I've been waiting to tell you. Cool. Let's just dive into it. I want to hear about New York and why you chose to live here. I know you've lived in other cities. You went to school in Boston. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your choice to choose New York.
So I'm actually born and raised in New York for like the first decade of my life. I grew up like a few blocks from here, actually, like mostly in Fide and Chinatown before it became the ritzy thing that it is. But I think for me, like spending the first decade of my life in New York, which is like, by the way, like post 9/11 chaos downtown, I think that once that chaotic energy is in your blood, it's like hard to go anywhere else. And so I was in New York, and then we moved to Portland, Oregon, and I was always just so frustrated there because of the pace, like the slowness, how slow someone takes to make you coffee, like everything I always felt really frustrated by. But I also felt like I was not really fitting in there, right? Like I remember in middle school, people would be like make fun of me for being a spaz, and you know, back then it was much more appropriate to use that word, but like that's, you know, I would just constantly be made fun of for having this kind of chaotic energy. And when I'm in New York, I just feel like it's calmer because everyone else around me is like matching the chaotic energy, and I just think it's so beautiful, and it's like energy that I find so thrilling. And I know not everybody feels that way, but like I'm totally like, it's in my blood. Like I can't imagine going anywhere else.
Would you say that's the best thing about New York?
I would say like the chaotic energy, but it's also just like parts of New York that other people find gross. Like I miss when I travel. Like I was internationally traveling the last couple of weeks. I got back last night, and I was so excited to come back because I missed the subway. Like I love the subway. I'm like diehard New York City subway. It's so much better than driving. And like anywhere else I go, like I went to LA last week, and the whole time I was like, I just miss the subway. Like I miss the grime of it, the predictability of it, you know, sometimes the unpredictability of it. So it's a bit of that, but also like I had just decided to start this company in 2021. My college was still virtual, and if you're starting a CPG company and you're raising capital, a lot of those investors are here in New York.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So you shared a lot on social media that you've had some challenges in your childhood growing up. How has that shaped you as a person, and how has that made you into the entrepreneur you are today?
I think trauma totally like, you know, follows all of us. But I would say that for me, like I, growing up, was around a lot of instability. And I think that I was also around a lot of, it's interesting because like I simultaneously felt really out of control about my situation because I was young and I like couldn't dictate a lot of what was going on. But I also felt in control of certain things, right? Like things that I could control was how I show up as a sister, how I do well in school. At a really young age, like I would say middle school, I started to really fall in love with extracurriculars, which is like kind of a quote unquote like early young work thing, right? Like I loved organizing clubs, leading clubs. I threw myself into school because it was really like an escape away from whatever was happening in my mind or at home. And so I think that I've always found such love and joy in the non-personal part of my life. And I think for a long time I'd always be like really ashamed of that, of like, oh, I'm too obsessed with what I do. But I think I've gotten to a point, like honestly in the last year, where I've started to realize like I don't have a separation of work and life very much. And I think that's okay because like so much of who I am is what I do and what I'm passionate about. And I'm really lucky that my passion has like turned into this amazing profession. But I think that like everything I am as a woman, as a menstruator, as a sister, and as like someone who like loves the hustle of work is what shows up in my work life too, running a company.
Totally. Can you share like a specific experience or story that was particularly memorable or impressionable for you when you were much younger?
Yeah, I mean, I think for, my family experienced housing instability a few times growing up. And I think that, there are a couple things. One, I think it made me really passionate about like community because that's always really hard to go through. And I also think I have a single mom and 2 younger sisters. And so like my community was like women and we like all shared one bathroom growing up. We were very close. And so there was no like potty talk, inappropriate talk. Everything was very open. So I think that was a really big part of it. I would also say that like, when you don't have a lot, you have to kind of learn to ask for things and like make big asks. And whether that be like my school at the time didn't have free and reduced lunch because I went to a private school on scholarship, and like me and my sisters were the first kids who were like, hey, we need lunch and like we can't afford the lunch, right? Whether it be having to make uncomfortable asks like that or things like we need bus passes or financial aid. Like I do think that we are kind of figuring it out ourselves in this kind of circumstance where we needed to make uncomfortable asks. I think like that taught me a lot, right? And I mean, now I'm having to ask for big money to like run a company, and this is my like 3rd company. But I think that I had practice on that very early on. But I also think like running a startup is one of the most unstable careers you can choose, right? It's like the whole very high risk, low chance, but high reward if you get it. And I think that for me, like growing up, it was always in risky situations and not a lot of stability. And so stability kind of freaks me out. It's something that I've had to like learn in my dating life is like to embrace stability and like love stability. But I definitely think like housing instability and just like kind of having to navigate that as a kid, like taught me a lot for my work life.
Totally. Do you feel like having a more of a difficult financial background has that made it harder for you to dream big?
It's interesting because I think that like this is where I credit my mom a lot to like always reminding us like how privileged we were too. Like my family went through hardship, but I was also like on scholarship at the fanciest private school in Portland, right? And like my mom went to Harvard, my dad went to Brown. Like I'm from like Ivy educated parents who, I just financially, we didn't end up in the best spot, whether that be because of domestic violence or mental health things, and circumstantial. And so I think that it was interesting because I was in this position where it was like, I knew what possibilities of life were. And I knew my mom would always remind us like how good we had it because we had each other, because we had education. Education was always very much framed as like the way out, right? Like there was a lot of pressure to go to Harvard because it was like, I knew if I went to Harvard, it would be free, right? Because they have like the biggest endowment in the world. And so I think that for me, like expectations were always very high, and it was always very much like you can create anything. And I mean, I started my nonprofit when I was 16. But I would also say like, I would credit social media in many ways for allowing me to know that possibilities were endless, because I was on social media starting my career in 2014, starting my first nonprofit, which is right around the same time, like Malala was virally, her story was all over social media, and the Parkland students, because of the mass shootings and all the activism that was happening around that, the girl boss movement, I know obviously there's been a lot of criticism of it, but I came onto social media when I was 16, right when like that kind of girl boss, create your own destiny, pull a seat up to the table, all those kind of girl boss cliches were really popular. And so I think that for me, like what I saw online was a huge inspiration for me. And my takeaway from that was like, well, fuck the system. Like I can, as a young person, as a woman, as someone who has access to like digital mobilization, AKA social media, I can absolutely create some sort of new future.
That makes so much sense. People say like social media is an escape from reality, and they say that in such a negative way, but it's an escape from reality, and sometimes your reality is not that great, and it allows you to even dream of a possibility that doesn't even exist. And and social media in some way like enables that. It would be impossible without it.
Absolutely.
Do you feel like being Asian has limited you from opportunities in any way?
It's interesting. I obviously I can't say if it's limited me. I think it has limited me. Like if you look at the statistics, right? Like percentage of women of color who raise capital or, you know, stereotypes. I would say race began to play a really big part in my life, obviously, when I ran for office. I ran for Cambridge City Council in 2017 when I was 19. And I thought that like the headline of my campaign would be that I was 19, like running for public office. But in every headline, as people talked about it, it was actually more about my race, around being like an Asian American. The hate that we got online and in person was very much around my race, was around like, you know, the KKK on social media saying start of an Asian invasion. And I think that I unexpectedly kind of fell into this world of Asian American advocacy because I learned new things around like Asian Americans being the fastest growing minority population in the US, having some of the lower voter turnout, but just like the need for representation as an AAPI community. And so I would say that it definitely it has to impact everything that I do, because like the first thing you see about me is that I'm like long hair Asian girl, you know, like that. If you know nothing about me, that's what I look like. And I think that it really was at that kind of 2018 time that it started really coming obviously into my life and work. I'd also say like growing up, like I was always loud about periods because that's what my first nonprofit was. And I definitely think people like were always more surprised because like the stereotype around being an Asian girl is that you're like quiet and submissive. And I was running around being like, fuck the tampon tax, periods. Like, you know, I think I was always kind of not that stereotype in many ways.
Totally. So you're Japanese and Taiwanese descent.
Yes.
How has the conversation of menstruation and periods affected you and your community? Is that something that's looked down upon? Is that something that's talked about freely?
So it's super interesting because I'm like actually not in touch with my extended family. I think it's for many reasons. Like actually social media is a really big part of why I was disowned with my sisters a couple years ago. And we were very open about that experience. But like, I definitely think my relationship with my Taiwanese grandparents, like, you know, the message that I always got was we came to the US so you could go to Harvard, you could be a lawyer, you could do all these things. And it's very taboo to like not only acknowledge trauma, but talk about it and share it online. It's like very dishonorable. And so the fact that like I did go to Harvard, but then I made a career showing my period blood online and talking about trauma and talking about generational trauma is like a huge no-no. I wasn't very in touch with my extended family very much by the time that I got my period. And so I think in many ways, like I hate to say it, but I do think that I probably have a more progressive idea around talking about periods and trauma so openly because I wasn't in touch with them, because I'm removed from that more conservative side of the family.
There's just less expectations you need to fulfill. Totally. And while you were in Harvard, you had, or no, actually, when you were in high school, you had tons of scholarships. Can you tell more about what they are? And maybe you can share some tips on like how we can actually get scholarships to go to school.
It's so crazy because like, I mean, now it's so long ago. It's like 8 years ago.
Still very impressive, but and worth acknowledging.
Like in many ways, like my anxiety fuels a lot of my hustle. There are good things about that. There are bad things about that, right? It's like it used to be very unhealthy, but I had a lot of anxiety around like money and scarcity and being able to afford college. Like my mom made it very clear to me, like we have no money for college. And that, you know, when I remember looking at like the scholarship being like, okay, well, one, I don't even know if I'm going to get into Harvard. If I don't get into Harvard and all the applications, I remember like the timelines don't match up. So you're applying for scholarships before you know if and where you're going to college. And so it's like you have to start a year before. So I would say in junior year, literally on my weekends and on free times, I would just Google scholarships on anything, on forums, on Reddit, on Google, and anything that I was remotely applicable for, I would do it. And this was before we had ChatGPT. So it wasn't like I was generating application answers. It was like I would literally like put on TV and like just apply to things constantly. I remember I applied for like any scholarship that was around being Asian, tech scholarships, scholarships to afford books. And I ended up getting like, you know, Coca-Cola, which was like, I remember, and I had a whole spreadsheet, the Gates Millennium Scholarship, you know, which would have covered full ride anyways. And like scholarships for like laptops, books. The Elks scholarship was probably one of the more random ones, but was honestly like one of the higher cash value ones. It's like there are these Elks lodges, which are kind of like veteran communities in middle America. And I had to paper write an application and drop it off in the back of a closed bar at like 9 p.m. in rural suburban Oregon. And because there's a local Elks lodge, and then that local Elks lodge, I like went into the back, slipped it under the door of this bar because I couldn't go in. It was that lodge. And then your application moves through regional, state, national, and it ended up being like $75K because they choose one girl, one boy. But I was on it with the scholarships. I was applying to everything, had my spreadsheet, like I was a little overboard.
That's actually crazy, especially because a lot of the time no one even knows about these scholarships.
No,
you have to actually like search the internet and like rabbit hole to find them.
I was definitely down that rabbit hole, and I'm very, very fortunate because I ended up not even being able to use a lot of them and giving them back to the foundation because like the Elk scholarship I never used because Harvard had already covered it, Gates Millennium had covered it. So I was very, very fortunate, and like that's where I would say my anxiety hustle really paid off.
That's awesome. So you started your nonprofit at 16 and you ran it through your time at Harvard. How did you balance classes and actually literally running a nonprofit that was so huge?
I mean, to be honest, I think that I was always very much into like, I was always the kid like in classes where I would do homework for that class during class, right? And sometimes I'd get in trouble for it, but like my mentality on school was always like, this is a means to an end, and the end of what I really want to do is outside of school. And whether that be like in middle school when I was really into dance or sports, and then when I was in high school, it was like I do school as little as possible. I never read the books. I'm really good at spark noting because I'm really into the nonprofit. I love ballet. I was on the boys varsity baseball team in mock trial and MUN and choir. Like I loved all the other things. And so for me, like my mentality was always like outside of school is priority. And I have to get good grades inside of school so that I can keep doing these outside of school things. My mom was very always upfront with me. Like, you can only do more clubs if you're still getting good grades in school. But I think for me, I was always very like overbooked. Part of it is growing up in New York too. Like I was a New York City kid. Like I had a schedule. I had like piano twice a week and dance twice a week and Kung Fu in Chinatown twice a week. Like I was a booked out schedule kid. And I've had to like unlearn a lot of that. But I would say that for me, like I was always very into I love doing and having a packed schedule outside of class. And when I got to college, I didn't give a fuck about school. I definitely was like, well, I know I don't want to go to grad school, grades, whatever. You know, like I was like, C's get degrees. I'm going to like, I love what I'm doing outside of school. I want to do more of it. And so like my first half of my year, or my college career, I was doing the nonprofit and I ran for office my freshman and sophomore year. And then I was running the nonprofit and built this Gen Z marketing agency with a few friends of mine, which recently sold. And then by junior year, it was like I was handing off the nonprofit and the consulting agency and starting August and like doing the social media thing.
Yeah, that's honestly incredible. Can you share some influences or mentors you had on this journey across entrepreneurship, activism that really like made you successful?
I've never been one to be like, this is a mentor. Like I've never asked someone, can you mentor me? I think I always just like look at everyone as a mentor. Like anybody that I meet or learn from, like I think that there's so much you can learn from each other and through conversations. I've always been very into like cold emailing people to learn about topics that I don't know about. Like I remember starting August, I was cold emailing so many experts in supply chain because I was like, I just need to learn about this. And I've always been very like passionate about surrounding myself with people who are much smarter than me and work harder than me. And so I think that I never had like a specific mentor, but I always looked up to everyone and I'm very into listening to audiobooks of like memoirs of people that I'm really inspired by. So I would say that's a huge part of it. But I'd also say like it's all about choices. Like I did not have a social college experience, right? And like I think that's something that a lot of young aspiring entrepreneurs like sometimes miss, which is like, how do you balance, like there's not only so many hours a day, how do you balance being a college student and being an entrepreneur? And my thing is like, let's be real, I had a very lonely college experience. Like I didn't go out a lot. I only stay in touch with one person from college. Like I don't have like a core college group of friends. I wasn't part of any college. By the end, I wasn't part of any college groups or extracurriculars. Like I was very isolated, mostly in my room, mostly in the library. And I like didn't really socialize beyond work. And I think that that's something that I eventually had to pay the price for. Like I ended up having like a huge mental breakdown, felt very lonely. But I think that that's always something I have to remind people too, which is like, I wasn't really a college student. I was like scraping by, doing the bare minimum, choosing sociology because it was the degree that required the least amount of hours. Like for me, it was a complete conscious choice to invest in doing the work. And I probably, if I could go back and do it again, would do some things differently.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that because we never talk about that. There's literally finite amount of times. I think that triangle like concept is really important, which is like there's sleep, there's like socializing, and then there's like your work, and you can only pick two. And like very much like that was your cost, your social life, and that was the choice you had to make. And that's why I say like people shouldn't just randomly pursue entrepreneurship without truly understanding the sacrifice you're going to have to take. And many entrepreneurs like yourself say they do something differently, but I don't know. And I'd love to know your opinion on this. I don't know any entrepreneur who says like they regret that time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like there are things that I would do differently. And like, I don't think I'd be here without having made those sacrifices. Do I like stand by those sacrifices? Like not necessarily. Like I don't have the greatest relationship with even family members because I wasn't always so present. But I definitely like, worked really hard and it paid off. But I think it was a big risk to take, right? And but I think I'm very consciously now, like I sleep a lot. I sleep like 8 to 10 hours a night, which is for a startup is like ridiculous. Like I sleep a lot and then I work. And like that is what I choose to do. I don't go out a lot. But I'm very happy with that. I think like I'm more introverted in that sense. I genuinely don't know how my extroverted friends do it. Like I have a couple entrepreneur friends who like they have social plans every night. And I'm like, what? How do you do that? Like, what? So yeah, I think it's like, it's just an active choice. And it was a choice that I made starting when I was 16.
Yeah. I mean, I'm extroverted and I can say it's extremely difficult to say no to plans. But anytime I don't say no to plans, I always suffer. Like it costs my business. Like that is very real. Is there like one thing you would change that you think wouldn't actually affect where you are today? If you can go back in time, would you change it?
I would sleep more for sure. I think like part of my burnout was like, I mean, in college, I was sleeping like 2 to 3 hours a night, right? And I think like, I honestly think that sometimes I sleep, there are nights where I'll sleep like 14, 16 hours, probably once a week. And like, I don't know if scientifically this is true, but like there is a part of me that thinks like I'm just making up for like so much lost sleep from when I was younger and just like the stress. And I mean, I was not in a healthy place of high school. And I think like that's always something I bring up in a conversation now because I remember like being on book tour and like always being so glorified of like being a successful high schooler. But like behind the scenes, I was like, first of all, cutting myself, very depressed, very anxious. And I was regularly going to the emergency room because I would be at home and pass out from exhaustion on the floor. And then I'd be wheeled to the emergency room where the nurses knew my name because I was frequently there. They'd hook me up to an IV and they'd be like, you're exhausted. You need to slow down. You need to drink more water. And I'd be like, my mom and my sisters kind of joke about it now, but I was so unhealthy. I would just like, I have to do homework. I have so much emails to do, pull out IVs and like literally walk myself out of the emergency room. And so I always bring that up because it's like, I definitely think like I came into my career at the height of hustle and girl boss culture where it was like hustle till you drop, work, no sleep, always working, success, myth of meritocracy. And like I did benefit from that because of like where my career got me, how the financial benefits of what it provided me and my family. But there was big cost to it that I think that like really I had to like pay the price for down the line.
How did that affect your relationship with your family, especially your mom? Probably like for her to watch that as a mother, like that must have been difficult for her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely is like it was hard for my family in many ways. I mean, one of my sisters, like we've been public about this. Like I was just never home. Like I was either at school, I was like the president of Mock Trial, MUN, Asian Pride Club, like 6 different clubs. And then I was doing like basketball, ballet, the nonprofit. I worked as a paralegal. I was like so overbooked, and I was like running away from all my thoughts and feelings. And I think it meant that like I was just never home. Like I would leave because I had morning choir at 7 a.m. I'd get home at 11:30 p.m. when my sisters were asleep. So like I was just absent. And so I think that's a big part of it. And I think my mom, like I talked to her yesterday, and she was like, I feel like you left home at age 14. Like even though I was going to school, living with her, I was never really there. And I think in many ways it was intentional. Like I had a lot of stress and trauma from being at home. But I think that it's something that like was really different when I was younger.
Totally. How has the conversation around periods changed since you started talking about it versus now?
I mean, I think it's changed tremendously. Like I've been talking about it so openly for 10 years. Back then, I did start kind of trying to put, my toe in the pool of media where I would be like time of the month. And the way I talked about it was very different of like people need period products, commodified period products. And then I think over the years it became because periods are natural. And then it was like because periods are beautiful, because I can talk about periods and I can show period blood. It wasn't until like year 6 of my career where I showed period blood online. And I think that like 4 years ago when I started doing that, my videos would get taken down, my accounts would get banned. And now I'm like fully able to do that, And so I think that we have seen so much change, even in how it shows up, online, right? Like it was barely talked about or shown in media, and then Saltburn came out and he just ate her out while she's on her period. Like we've made a lot of progress in terms of media. There's still some barriers, right? Like period products are a banned category on TikTok Shop, but we're definitely making progress.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Like I can't even remember a time where that like period blood would literally get banned because like it's such an unfathomable thing at this point. Yeah. So that's really amazing. I know you touched a little bit on burnout, but I want to come back to it because that's like something that's extremely real. I've experienced it. So many people have experienced it. Can you share a little bit more about like how you deal with it now in your life, and also like some of the like bigger consequences, like when you weren't dealing with it, and like how you were able to recover from it and like get back to the grind? Because like you've been working, like you said, literally since you were 14, day in and day out. And so I'm sure there's like many points of like actually struggling with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now it's just like all about preventative measures. And I actually remember, so I ended up in rehab when I was like in 2020, and I was there for like about 2-3 months. And when I was there, I actually had to go through like addiction treatment for addiction to work. And like I always have to preface by saying like I wasn't like, oh, I'm a workaholic, like boasting workaholic. Like I didn't poop because I was like would think of it as an opportunity cost for work, because I'd be like, I should send 3 more emails rather than going poo. And so I'd go like 3 weeks without pooping and get really sick, Like I was addicted. A lot of that was from like a place of trauma, was like anything. Like I remember like I went through a bad breakup in college, and I went through this like year where every time I shut my laptop, I would just cry. And I think that for me, like work was an escape in many ways. And I think I've had to unlearn a lot of that, because one, it hurt my relationships, it hurt me and where I was, but it also like hurt my work, right? I was like falling asleep on the job. I was so dissociated. Like I don't have a lot of memories from some of like the big success years. I was so focused on like quantifying the impact of the work that I was doing, and then the money I was bringing into the organization, and how I could put my body on the line to bring in that money, whether it be through brand deals or otherwise. And so I think for me, like I paid the price because I got to a burnout place, but also because like I got to a place in my life where I'd burned so many bridges. I'd made decisions that like I would never make today. And so I think that after when I was going through addiction treatment, so much of it is about like you go through like those kind of 12 steps of how do you just prevent it, right? And so now I'm always very on high alert around like where am I and how rested I feel. Do I feel any flag of burnout, and like how do I nip it in the bud, right? And so I think that, I mean, burnout is not like an off and on switch. Burnout is probably just a word that's been made up to encapsulate what it feels like to be tired, right? And I do have those moments where I'm like, I've slept 10 hours, but I'm exhausted. And like, how do I just put boundaries around what I'm doing or change my behavior so I'm not that? And, I think when I was younger, and people would be like, well, your energy is not the way you're working is not sustainable, I'd be like, oh, fuck you. Like, I'm a superhuman. Like, you have no idea. Like, that's maybe you. It's not my problem. But it's true. Like, you know, like when you're tired and you don't work as well, you're not as efficient, you know, you don't make the best choices. And so now I think it's just like about priorities.
Totally. So what do you do now to recognize it and then stop it from happening?
I think it's like, I'm very like religious about like my exercise. Like I go to solid core, or like yoga, Pilates, or a run. I have a dog, which is like probably the biggest thing I've done for my mental health. But I think like those times for me where I'm not on my phone and I'm doing a really challenging workout where I have to be focused or I'll fall down or injure myself, like that kind of force focus time is like where I start to really tap into like how I'm feeling. And so for me, physical workouts is like such a big thing. And I think like I recognize like if I'm tired, I binge watch like probably 6 hours of TV a day where I'm just like working with the TV in the back because it like makes me laugh, you know? And so I think it's just like creating more of those times where I'm just like checking in with myself. And it's not like let me journal, you know, that doesn't work for me. It's just like, oh, I'm like feeling kind of tired, or like I'm feeling kind of like, oh, I'm really hungry, or like, you know, just times where I'm just trying to be more present about how I'm doing. It
literally requires you to be more in tune with your body and then actually act on it.
Exactly.
Totally. No, that makes so much sense. I want to talk a little bit about Period Inc. that you started in 2014. So can you share a little bit more about how people reacted when you started this, and also like what really inspired you to start this?
Yeah, so I inspired to start this organization because I had learned about just what period poverty was, of like the phenomenon of people not being able to afford period products through conversations in my local community. I learned that at the time there was the tampon tax, which is the unfair sales tax in like 40 states at the time. Now it's in like 20. And was just angered by it. And I would say that the anger and frustration I felt around the issue inspired me to be like, okay, I need to find an organization to volunteer with. Let me look one up. Oh, wait, I can't find one. So we need to start one. How do I start an organization? And just Googling, going down this rabbit hole of like, oh, it's really just that like I fill out this form to create an entity, and then the entity can be a nonprofit and we can mobilize, we can do things. And I don't think anything of what I created was like a genius thing. It was very simple. It was like a copycat of, oh, at school we have gene drives and food drives. I'll just have a period product drive and do it at school and then try to get other people to do it. That's exactly what I was doing. Like I was just copying what was out there, but changing it for period products. And I think that that's what my career has just been like, I wouldn't say that I was necessarily like creative with any of my things. It was like I was just always very inspired by like what already existed. And so yeah, that's what Period was. And I think that because of social media, honestly, it scaled very quickly. It was like, oh, other people are asking us for a toolbook on how we did this. We wrote one down on Google and started sharing it and created a Google sheet of quote unquote chapters. Like everything was very much like, oh, what did Women's March do? What did Parkland students like? What are these chapter models? Let's do that. Let's, you know, just kind of being inspired by other models of impact, and then using social media because it was very quickly the thing that worked the best for creating fundraising channels, you know, engaging volunteers. And I grew that organization for 6 years, at which point we were distributing millions of products, had thousands of chapters. But I would say that one of the things I'm proudest of myself for was like then stepping down. It's very hard to step down from like a baby you created. But in 2019, I got to a point where I just hated my job because, I mean, when you're an executive director of a nonprofit, your sole responsibility is fundraising. I was having to fundraise millions of dollars a year to keep the lights on, to grow the programs. And I just felt like I wasn't the best at the job. And so I was always in this like beating myself up of like, I'm just not the best person. I felt like every day I was stunting the organization's growth, and it was growing so fast that it was like, I need someone else who's like done this before. And so in 2019, I did like a big capital raise to do a national search, find a new executive director, replace myself, and fully stepped out in like February of 2020. And I think that that's something I'm proudest of myself for, was like quitting. And I think same thing for the consulting is like, I could have done that and seen it all the way through exit. But like a few years in, I was like, I'm really passionate about this August thing. I think I need to like fully quit this to work on that.
Focus is so powerful. Yeah. You can't really achieve anything exceptional without it. And focus requires saying no to so many things. Which is so hard. Yeah. My goodness. So you wrote your book, Period Power, at 20. What actually made you want to write the book?
I'm honestly like, it was meeting with a lot of like Republican congressmen who just knew nothing about the subject. And I always felt like really disrespected. And and again, like I will specifically say like Republican congressmen, there are a few that I won't name, but like I just remember feeling so belittled around like them not believing me that this was a real issue, them not believing period stigma was a thing, and feeling like they didn't really take the fact that how many followers we had online didn't matter. And I got really into this mindset of like, I think I need something that kind of solidifies this is a credible issue, right? Like when you're in school, right, and you have to like cite facts, like what you cite is books, and books is like such a beacon of credibility. So I would say that's when I started really thinking about a book. And then it was also like I was just meeting thousands of people around the country every year talking about periods, you know, doing this lobbying work where I kept wanting something where like when people would ask me like the same questions over and over again, what is the period stigma? Why does it exist? How do we fight it? Or what is a period? How do I use a tampon? Being like, I just need something where I could be like, here are all the, oh, I brought you a copy today, by the way.
I'm so excited.
But like, here are the answers. Like this, just like read this, right? And so I think it was kind of a culmination of all of that. That was like, I'm going to write a book. I just Googled how to write a book and then learned what a literary agent was.
Wow. Wait, can you actually share more about that process of writing it? I'm super
I Googled
curious.
how to write a book. Then I remember finding like a wiki answers, like literally, you know how some of those like Yahoo wiki answers were the like drawn pictures? It was like, write a book proposal, cold email literary agents. And so that's what I did. I just like found books that I liked and then stalked their literary agents, cold submitted to like maybe 100, heard back from 3. One of them said yes. And that's who I went with.
Literally so real. Say like 100 cold messages, 3 will
responses. Yeah.
1 will say yes.
Yeah. And that's all you need. You just need one. And then Simon & Schuster, which was like my dream publisher, picked it up. And then they gave me like 4 months to write it. And so I wrote it over winter break, like my sophomore year of college.
So you share a lot of these stories on social media as well, especially around the stigma of periods. There is a lot of negative backlash.
Yeah.
And can you share more about why do you think that is, and like how do you deal with that negative backlash?
I mean, I think negative backlash around period content is just like representative of how much internalized misogyny we have, which is like, and a lot of that backlash is mostly from other women, right? Who say like, this is disgusting, this is shameful, this is gross. And to me, I actually find that backlash very motivating because it just like reveals to me like how much internalized shame there is around it. And that's just so sad, right? I mean, I think that period stigma is such an issue because it is so rooted in like the basics of how gender roles were constructed, the basics of how we fundamentally think about bodies and reproductive health. And yeah, so to me, like there's a lot of hate, but it's very motivating.
Yeah, you're so right. It's the core of so much of our society.
Yeah.
And to eliminate that hate is like critical for us to advance.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. So you technically were canceled in 2020 when you stepped down from your nonprofit.
Yeah.
Can you share more about like what that felt like? How did you deal with it?
So I stepped down first and then it happened. And it's interesting because like, I think that now that I'm years past it, like, well, so basically like a lot of the backlash was that as an organization with chapters, the national organization, and honestly, like Women's March, Black Lives Matter are also chapter networks that have all been kind of quote unquote gone through cancel culture because of this, around like a national organization getting all the funding, but kind of taking credit for the impact of the work on the ground, right? Done by volunteers. I think it's an issue with the nonprofit world, which is that it all relies on volunteer labor, right? And I think we're at a time where we're really thinking about who has the privilege to volunteer, what should be compensated. And so all of that to say, like, for me, I think every bit of cancel culture is always rooted in some like very real ask for accountability. And so I try to like separate them, which is like, there was like a real conversation that needed to happen with like a few people who like really wanted to hold me accountable and like share their criticism and their feedback. And then there was like the internet storm that followed it, right? And I actually since like have very much reconnected with a lot of the people who were online, kind of starting a lot of it, and have had reconciled conversations. Some of them are current partners of mine now. Wow. But I would say that like it took a lot of time and effort to like parse through so many strangers who were piling on and sending me death threats and making up things. Like I remember there was a classmate of mine at Harvard who actually came up to me at graduation and apologized because he had hopped on this train where he made up this story and tweeted about how he had cleaned my bathroom and then I spit on him and I was so disrespectful and I was actually like a rich bitch with millionaire parents, and that went really viral. was a total made up thing. And so I always like kind of preface of like, I think that there's cancel culture, but I don't want to take away from like the realness of like the conversations that need to be held, and like where there were very, very real things that I needed to take accountability for, because the internet storm was very different. Right. But it sucked because it was so out of my control. Right. It was like, and so much of my livelihood, literally how I funded the nonprofit, like it really hurt the nonprofit. That was one of the hardest things to see, was that the result was mostly that, like, you know, I was still living. I was fine. I was in rehab. I was getting the help that I needed. The nonprofit lost like 50% of its funding overnight. And that nonprofit, the funding wasn't reallocated to other organizations. For the most part, it just stopped going into the space. So the result was just that less people got period products during the pandemic. And that was one of the hardest things when cancel culture exists in nonprofits. And I'm not saying that there's not a reason for it, but I'm saying the result on paper was that less funding went to it. It wasn't reallocated. It was just pulled. And that was one of the hardest things to see.
Especially because you worked so hard to get that funding.
And, you know, I think that I'm so grateful timing wise that I had at that point, and that was another crazy part, was everyone was asking me to step down, and I was like, I'm not the executive director anymore, but I fully was like on it. But I'm very thankful to have, you know, there's still the same executive director of the organization who's just been so amazing. And I remember it was like 3 months into her on the job where it was like she was handed this mess and had to like push it through this hard time. And they've done such an amazing job of not only like learning from a lot of the issues, but yeah. But I would say that for me, like I don't think I would ever have posted my period blood on social media if I hadn't gone through that, because it was so awful. And like I had lost so much of my self-worth, but it forced me to like find self-worth outside of social media and outside of my work, because like I lost it all. Like I didn't know if I had a career to come back to. And I had to be like, you know, unlearn a lot of things. I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which meant that I had no sense of self, and I like all my self-worth had come from work. And so I got to this point also where it was like, well, they took everything that I had. I have nothing to lose. Let me post my period blood online. And I don't think I would have had the thick skin that I do without that experience.
Totally. Yeah. Can you share more about period poverty in general and like how that affects women around the world?
I mean, it's just like when you don't have access to period products, right? Like I think anybody who's struggling to afford basic necessities, food, shelter, otherwise is also struggling to pay upwards of $20 a month for period products. That could be 5 meals, right? And so I think that it's a very underestimated issue. And, you know, the fact that we have legislation that prevents period products being free in places that we need it, or the tampon tax literally taxing period products as luxury items. I mean, period poverty and just culture around periods is a leading cause of absenteeism for girls around the world. And there's so many other layers of like cultural stigmas are in different parts around the world. But yeah, I would say that whether it be not allowing menstruators to fully, you know, achieve in school or in economic abilities is like very much present. And period poverty is a very prevalent issue that I think once you hear about it, you can't stop thinking about.
Yeah. How do we engage men and non-menstruators in this conversation?
I think it's just always bringing it up. Like, you know, every conversation we have around reproductive health. I mean, if you think about the presidential debate, right, we're talking about support for middle-class working families, immigrants, you know, people who have uteruses. They're like, getting your period is such a overarching universal experience for the majority of the population. And so I think that for me, it's just like you involve non-menstruators by just like pointing out the fact that it's in every room we walk into. Every relationship that you have with a menstruator, your fucking wife, your kids, your daughter, your mom is a menstruator. And so like, how do you just bring that up? And when you think about supporting the menstruators in your life, doing that, right? Like, I guarantee if my boyfriend came home with flowers, I would not be as touched as if he came home with tampons, you know, yeah. Especially if they were August tampons.
So real. Okay. Tell me more about August and the process of actually creating a lifestyle brand.
Yeah, so August we started as a direct-to-consumer period care brand that makes tampons and pads, and then are now in Target and on Amazon. And I would say everything, I never thought I would run a brand. I never thought I would even go into business, but I would say that it's like a culmination of like my early career and everything I learned, right? Again, started a nonprofit that was product-based, trying to get products, make brands more care about impact, and then also raise money from them. And then having to fundraise from them, not having the power of that capital, right? And we live in a capitalistic society where that is the source of influence and impact. And so really kind of craving like the power that comes with privilege to make an impact. then having to work with a lot of the companies, then having them as consulting clients where I was trying to get them to be more bold, more productive, make better products, and being like, I'm consulting them, they're not listening, I need to do something about it. Writing a book, and part of the research that I did for the book was trying to answer the question, why does the period stigma exist? And kind of the answer to that from my research being like, it's the commodification and capitalistic message that's been put out around hide your period because it's gross. So you buy products to hide your period and forget you have a period. And like periods have become into mainstream media through that commodification, that I was like, the brand, like if brands created the stigma in the way that we know it, that they're the ones that have to take it down. Started August and was so in love with the direct to consumer space. It was like kind of right time. You know, COVID was happening. There was a tampon shortage. We figured out how to make better tampons and better pads. I also hated pads and, you know, hated the way tampons felt. And so it was like a selfish interest to make better tampons and better pads.
Yeah, I mean, there's no better pain point to solve than one for yourself.
Yeah.
I'm really obsessed with this story because Gen Chi, my company, used to be a nonprofit as well. Yeah. And now it's fully for profit. We've grown into like a media company and a fund. And like the biggest reason is because capital runs the world. Yeah. And if you truly deeply care about making world-changing impact, and if you really care about a mission and a message, you need money by your side, unfortunately. Yeah. Like, it sucks that the world works that way, but it's only in our best interest to spread our message, to kind of go in the for-profit direction. And I really want more women to understand this, because I do think many ambitious women specifically, they'll start off their entrepreneurial journey with social impact, and they think that social impact can only come in one form, which is as a nonprofit. And I think we just like need to do more work to like better understand, like, you can create a lot of really great change in the world, but then still have money by your side, and in some ways just do so much more for the world.
No, I mean, I think that like now I love how you said that. I think it's so well worded, because I think it's part of like the financial feminism side of things, which is like, we live in a world run by money. So if we all keep being like shy to ask for money and running things that don't give us money and don't collect money, we still like, private equity is like majority white men. And that's what fuels so much of the economy. And it's this hidden, secret, dark world that we don't see. And I think that it's through my work where I was like, I did the same thing. I was like, I'm going to run a nonprofit because I care about impact. Then my job is fundraising from companies and from wealthy individuals.
Who are all white men.
Who are all mostly white men. Then I run for office. The way that our system works is you raise capital. Most of our polling works to measure electability of a candidate is how much money they have raised. And so then you just think about, no matter what, public sector, private sector, social sector, it all depends on the private sector money. I also think like culturally, something I've had to really get over as an Asian person is like admitting that like I like having money and that I want to ask for money, right? Like, I think it's so uncomfortable, especially when you don't come from money, when you're Asian, to ask for money, to talk about money. And I think it's been like honestly really powerful in my mental health journey to be like, I love money. The things that make me happy is going shopping. I love eating good food. I love traveling. I love having a dog. I love buying toys for my dog. I buy $60 antlers for my dog because my dog likes antlers. You know, like, there's so many things that bring me happiness, and like, I need money to afford all of those things. And for many years, I was so ashamed to say that. And like, honestly, online, I've been called capitalist bitch, white supremacist capitalist, because I say I love money. And it's been a big journey to be like, no, I need money to survive. Everybody needs money. I think there's so many inequities. Like, everybody should have more money, but like, we still need money. And that's the reality that we live in.
Yeah. And until women can start to reframe their mindset around this, we're not going to hold capital to start actually making better decisions for that capital. Yeah. That actually make the world a better place.
It like, literally holds us back the most, more than anyone else.
Yes. Yeah. And ultimately, if like all of private equity and a lot of these like giant wealthy institutions that basically run our world are run by, again, wealthy white men, then the products and services and companies that women actually need to improve their lives don't get built.
Yeah,
and it just makes, like you said, our life so much worse. Okay, we've gone on a little bit of rabbit holes. I want to go back to August because it's very cool to hear your journey. What are the actual steps to starting a lifestyle brand, right? Like, how did you come up with the name August? Like, what was the first thing you did? Did you make a website? Like, I want to hear like the actual process.
I mean, going back to money, it's very expensive to build a product company because you have to buy the product and you have to design the product. You have to fulfill the product. You have to find a warehouse for it. It's very expensive. And so the first thing we had to do was raise capital. And we raised about a $2 million pre-seed round. which is very daunting because I didn't even know what VC stood for when we started this journey. And we were still in college. Me and my co-founder, we were juniors. He was at Princeton, I was at Harvard. And, but that was the first step, was like, you need money for like literally to make the website. And you know, we were always very scrappy. We still are very scrappy. We're a team of 7. And I think that people look at us online, they think we're huge. No, we're 7 people. But that was a big first step. And then I think a lot of it was just like constant looking for mentorship, right? Again, going back to this theme of just like advisors everywhere. It was like, we need product. How do we surround ourselves with experts on product development and supply chain and DTC and raise capital from founders who have done this before, who believe in the mission, who see the vision? And then I remember just like brainstorming names and literally talking to anybody who would listen, pitching them names. And there were so many stupid names. Like at one point, I really thought we would name the company Plum, because I was like, a plum looks like, if you smash it, it's like a period. My sister was like, that's disgusting. You know, I don't like that. August, I didn't even think of that myself. One of our investors is Bobby Hundreds, who's like a godfather of streetwear. And he had sent me a list of names. He almost named his kid, and August was one of the ones that didn't make the cut. And he wrote August because it means majestic dignity. And I was like, oh, that's the name. Like immediately it like fit all the boxes. But I would say we got to the name, we got to so much of the brand just by like conversations. Like every part of the brand, what it looks like, what the packaging looks like, what is the logo, was because we had this community of young people, and like even online talking to anybody, what do you think of this? What does this look like? Will you try this product? Like it was just so much of part of the process was just conversation.
Yeah.
And that's like that, when we say like quote unquote lifestyle brand, I think like that's the way you do it, was like it has to be so built in community. Because if you just build it for yourself, like I'm not a cool girl, by the way. Like, you know, when you look at these branding exercises, and we do a lot of this at August, like who's the cool girl on campus? That was not me. I was in the library. I was not invited to many parties, you know, that was not me. So for me, if I just had designed it for myself, it wouldn't have gone very far. But for me, it was like, I want to solve an issue for myself, but like, it needs to be for the people that I'm trying to serve. And I think the fact that we've always been very active listeners, we would not be where we are today without that belief.
Yeah, I will say that the it girl thing is kind of like not really relevant for building a great brand. Like relatability and authenticity is super important. So like, I bet that's a huge reason why August is so successful. I
think a lot of it was also, we were like, I was talking to all my it girl friends being like, do you like this? Is this cool? Would you talk about this? And anything that they were like, no, I'd be like, okay, well, we can't do that. Cause you need, you know, them to really buy into it too.
Totally. And you mentioned you have a male co-founder. How did you find this co-founder? And also he's literally on the mission of building something for women, and as a non-menstruator himself, like how does he? Yeah. I mean, I want to hear more about like any stigma that he's experienced, or like, how does he feel about it?
Well, so it's so interesting because like my co-founder of Period was also a guy. And I think that for me, part of it comes from like, I've always really believed in the need for men and non-menstruators to be a part of this movement, because patriarchy, like there's so much importance in that. Like they still have so much, I mean, they have the power. And so you need them to also be a part of empowering you, right? And be at the table. But I think part of it too was like, I was always like not even looking at gender. I was like looking at like, I need to build a business. Who's the best person to help me? Who's the smartest person I know? In high school, Vince was my co-founder. He's like the smartest, most organized person I knew. And, you know, with August, so the last company I was working for was a Gen Z marketing firm called Juve Consulting that just sold to UTA. I was the chief brand officer there. And Nick, my now co-founder of August, was the founder and COO of Juve Consulting. So we actually left together to start August. But so for me, it's like he was already a co-founder before. He was a partner of mine. We had built that company together. I loved working with him. I trusted him. We became very good friends. And I think that I was kind of, as I was starting to think about this vision, he just got it. And I think he also, like, I'd already worked with him, and he was the smartest and most hardworking person I knew. And so that's what it was. And he became very passionate about the issue. He actually wrote his senior thesis at Princeton about like how much period poverty is an issue and how businesses are the ones to solve it.
Yeah, I think the best co-founder relationships come from those who've like worked together in the past and actually are friends and know each other, because it's such a trusting thing. You have to build something from nothing together. So that honestly makes so much sense.
Yeah.
What do you think it takes for an entrepreneur to be successful today?
I would say a team. Like, I think that a team is more important than ever. I think intergenerational team is something I really, really believe in. Like, I mean, I think I get, you know, kind of portrayed a lot as like the Gen Z girl boss still, right? But like, I would not be where I am without the younger team members, but also the team members who are decades older than me, like bringing all their experience to the table. Like, I am such I really, really value experience. And I hope that my team members know that, because like, I mean, part of my BPD, right, is like, I mean, part of my diagnosis is literally like kind of a low self-confidence. And I think I come off very confident because the way I solve that low self-confidence is like, I just surround myself with people that I admire boundlessly. And I think because of that, it makes me confident in them, right? And in the team. And so for me, I think what makes you successful is like, you need to be able to build a team with compassion so that you are a person they want to work with and build with. And I think that that's something that like I value so much. I think me and my co-founder are also kind of like a dream team because we have opposite skills and like life interests, right? Like I am on social media. He would hate to make a TikTok. And he's so good at the operational thing. And like any human design exercise I do, I'm always like a big picture thinker. I'm not a small person, like a small picture thinker. And like that small picture is like, or not small picture, detail oriented. That detail orientation is so important, if not more important than the big picture, because like there would be no execution without that. And I think that that's something where like I've always surrounded myself with people who are very different from me. And I think that's necessary.
Yeah. Complementary skills are so critical.
Yeah.
If someone wants to start something today that they really believe in, potentially taboo or controversial, what advice would you give them?
Find a co-founder. Like I think that it's a very lonely experience already of starting a company. It's very risky. And not everybody's good at everything. And so I know there are solo founders out there who are very successful. I don't think I could emotionally do it without a co-founder and like a confidant. And I think that that's always the thing. And I also think if you cannot sell another person to literally believe in what you're doing so much that they want to join you, then maybe that's not a company worth starting. Like, you know, like it has to be such a good idea. And like that someone's like, that's what I want to do is my job. That like, I think about that a lot, right? Which is like, I think there are companies that I dream about, like other companies I dream about starting. And sometimes I talk to other people and like, I would never think about starting it if I didn't find someone who was like, that I want to do this with you.
Totally. Oh my God. That's the perfect thing to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming. Where can we find you?
Social media at Nadya Okamoto, and August is itsaugust.co.
Thanks so much for coming. You're the best. Thank you.